What if being eliminated was exactly what someone wanted all along? What if every smile, every handshake, every moment of apparent vulnerability was actually a carefully calculated move in a game so complex that even getting voted off was part of the winning strategy? Welcome to Narrated by Abi, where we bring you the most incredible true stories of strategy, betrayal, and brilliant minds at work. Today's story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about competition, trust, and the art of playing the long game. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss stories like this one. And if this tale of strategic genius amazes you, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates the beauty of a perfectly executed plan. This is the story of Amani Kamau, a business consultant from Nairobi, Kenya, whose elimination from a high-stakes reality competition became the very foundation of the most brilliant strategic victory anyone had ever witnessed. The cameras captured every moment of what appeared to be genuine shock and devastation. Amani Kamau sat in the elimination chair at the luxury Kenyan resort where the boardroom challenge was being filmed, his face a perfect mask of disbelief as the votes were read aloud. 4 votes for Amani, 2 votes scattered among others. He was going home. "I have to say I'm genuinely surprised," Amani said to the camera during his exit interview, his voice carrying just the right amount of hurt and confusion. "I thought we had built something real here. I thought the relationships I had formed, the trust we had established, meant something more than just game strategy." The host, Peter Mbugua, one of Kenya's most successful entrepreneurs, shook his head sympathetically. "Amani, you've been a strong competitor throughout this entire process. What do you think went wrong tonight?" Amani paused, as if gathering his thoughts, his eyes reflecting what appeared to be genuine pain. "I think I trusted too easily, Peter. I believed that if I helped others succeed, if I shared my knowledge and resources, if I put the team's success above my own personal advancement, that loyalty would be reciprocated. I was wrong." The cameras then cut to flashbacks that painted a picture of a man who had been nothing but generous and supportive throughout the competition. There was Amani, just 3 days earlier, staying up until 2 a.m. to help Sarah Wanjiku perfect her presentation for the marketing challenge. There he was, sharing his extensive network of Nairobi business contacts with James Kiprotich when James's tech startup pitch was falling flat. The footage showed him mediating conflicts, offering strategic advice, and consistently putting team success above individual glory. "Amani was like the big brother of our group," Sarah had said in a confessional just 2 episodes prior. "He always had our backs, always knew exactly what to say to help us perform better. I honestly don't know how we'd function without him." But the most damning flashback was from just 48 hours before the elimination. David Mwangi, the aggressive marketing executive who had orchestrated Amani's removal, was shown in a private conversation with Grace and Jerry, his closest ally in the competition. "Amani is too dangerous to keep around," David had whispered to Grace as they walked along the resort's manicured gardens. "He's too smart, too connected, too well-liked. If we let him get to the final 4, he'll destroy all of us. We need to make our move now, while we still have the numbers." Grace had nodded in agreement. "But how do we get Sarah and James on board? They worship the ground he walks on." "Leave that to me," David had replied with a cold smile. "I'll make them see that Amani is playing a deeper game than any of us realized. I'll make them understand that his helpfulness is actually manipulation, that his generosity is just a way to make us all dependent on him." The editing made it clear that David's campaign against Amani had been swift and effective. In a series of private conversations, he had systematically poisoned the well, planting seeds of doubt about Amani's true motivations. "Think about it," David had told James during a late-night conversation by the resort's infinity pool. "Amani always knows exactly what to say, exactly how to help, exactly what connections to offer. Doesn't that seem a little too convenient? A little too calculated? What if he's been playing us all along?" To Sarah, David had taken a different approach. "I'm worried about you," he had said with apparent concern. "Amani has you so dependent on his advice and support that you're not developing your own strategic thinking. What happens when he's not there to hold your hand? You need to prove to yourself and to the judges that you can succeed on your own merit. The psychological manipulation had been masterful. David had taken Amani's greatest strengths, his intelligence, his helpfulness, his strategic thinking, and reframed them as threats and weaknesses. By the time the elimination vote arrived, even Sarah and James, who had benefited most from Amani's support, had been convinced that voting him off was not just strategically necessary, but morally justified. As Amani gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the resort, the remaining contestants watched with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They had successfully eliminated their biggest threat, but there was something in Amani's demeanor that didn't quite fit the narrative of a blindsided victim. "Good luck to all of you," Amani had said as he shook hands with each remaining contestant. "I hope you get everything you deserve from this experience." At the time, it had seemed like a gracious farewell from a defeated competitor. Looking back, those words would take on an entirely different meaning. The cameras followed Amani as he walked toward the waiting car that would take him away from the competition. But what the other contestants didn't see, what the cameras didn't capture in that moment, was the subtle smile that played across Amani's lips as he settled into the back seat. It wasn't the smile of someone who had been outmaneuvered and defeated. It was the smile of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended. Phase 1 complete. Amani whispered to himself as the resort disappeared behind him. Now the real game begins. To understand the true genius of Amani's strategy, we need to go back to the very beginning of the competition and examine the seemingly innocent actions that would later reveal themselves as masterful chess moves on a board that only he could see. From day one, Amani had been playing a completely different game than everyone else. While his fellow contestants were focused on winning individual challenges and building obvious alliances, Amani was constructing an intricate web of dependencies, obligations, and strategic positioning that would serve him long after his apparent elimination. The first piece of his strategy had been established during the very first challenge, a team-based business simulation where contestants had to launch a mock company in 48 hours. While others fought for leadership roles and tried to showcase their individual talents, Amani had quietly positioned himself as the indispensable support system. "I noticed that everyone wanted to be the CEO or the head of marketing," Amani later explained in a private interview. "But no one wanted to handle the boring but critical infrastructure, the legal framework, the financial modeling, the operational logistics. So I became the person who made everyone else's grand ideas actually work." This wasn't just helpfulness, it was strategic positioning. By making himself essential to everyone's success, Amani ensured that eliminating him would be seen as cutting off their own lifeline. But more importantly, it gave him unprecedented access to everyone's strategies, weaknesses, and true personalities. During the second week of competition, Amani had made what appeared to be a casual suggestion that would later prove crucial. "You know," he had said during a group dinner, "we should all exchange contact information for our personal networks. If this competition is really about building the next generation of Kenyan business leaders, we should be thinking about how we can support each other long after the cameras stop rolling." The suggestion had been met with enthusiastic agreement. Everyone saw the value in expanding their professional networks. What they didn't realize was that Amani was conducting intelligence gathering on an unprecedented scale. Within days, he had detailed profiles of every contestant's business connections, family relationships, financial situations, and career aspirations. But perhaps the most brilliant aspect of Amani's early strategy was how he had begun building relationships with the eliminated contestants. While everyone else treated elimination as a final goodbye, Amani had made a point of staying in touch with each person who left the competition. "Amani was the only one who reached out to me after I got voted off in week 2, revealed Mercy Acheng, the first contestant eliminated. "He called me personally, not just a quick text, but a real conversation. He wanted to know how I was doing, what my plans were, whether there was anything he could do to help me with my business goals." This pattern had continued with every elimination. While the remaining contestants quickly forgot about their former competitors. Amani had been building a network of allies outside the game. He had connected eliminated contestants with business opportunities, made introductions that led to partnerships, and generally positioned himself as someone who could provide value even after the competition ended. "I didn't understand it at the time," admitted John Mwangi, eliminated in week 3. "Why would someone still in the competition spend so much time and energy helping those of us who were already out? It seemed almost counterproductive." But Amani explained it as building long-term relationships that would outlast any reality show. I thought he was just being genuinely nice. The third piece of Amani's strategy had been the most subtle and perhaps the most brilliant. Throughout the competition, he had been carefully documenting everything, not just the obvious drama and conflicts that the cameras captured, but the private conversations, the behind-the-scenes deals, the moments when people revealed their true characters. He had been particularly meticulous about recording David Mwangi's behavior. Every instance of David's arrogance, every moment when he had taken credit for others' work, every time he had made promises he didn't keep, Amani had noted it all. But he had done so quietly, without drawing attention to David's flaws or creating obvious conflict. Amani had this way of asking questions that made you want to tell him everything. Sarah Wanjiku later reflected. He was such a good listener, so genuinely interested in understanding people's motivations and backgrounds. I told him things about my business struggles, my family situation, my fears about the competition that I hadn't told anyone else. What Sarah didn't realize was that Amani was building psychological profiles of every contestant, understanding their pressure points, their motivations, and most importantly, their breaking points. He knew exactly what would make each person crack under pressure, what would cause them to make poor decisions, and what would turn them against each other. The fourth element of Amani's strategy had been perhaps the most audacious. He had been deliberately making himself appear more threatening than he actually was, while simultaneously making his elimination seem like it would solve everyone's problems. I started noticing around week 4 that Amani was almost too helpful, Grace and Jerry had confided to the cameras. He always had the perfect solution, the right connection, the ideal strategy. It started to feel like he was showing off, like he was trying to prove he was smarter than the rest of us. This wasn't accidental. Amani had been carefully calibrating his helpfulness to create exactly this reaction. He wanted the other contestants to see him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. He wanted them to believe that getting rid of him would level the playing field and give them all a better chance at winning. But the most ingenious aspect of this strategy was that Amani had been setting up his own elimination to occur at the exact moment when it would be most advantageous to him. He had been tracking the competition timeline, the remaining challenges, and the psychological state of his fellow contestants. He knew that by week 6, the pressure would be at its peak, alliances would be fracturing, and people would be most susceptible to making emotional, rather than strategic decisions. Looking back, I realized that Amani had been guiding us toward that elimination vote for weeks, James Kiprotich later admitted. He had been subtly encouraging David's paranoia about him, validating our concerns about his strategic advantages, even suggesting that the competition would be more fair and exciting if the playing field were more level. The final piece of Amani's pre-elimination strategy had been the most forward-thinking. He had been setting up systems and relationships that would continue to work in his favor even after he was no longer physically present in the competition. He had established communication channels with key people outside the show, business leaders, media contacts, potential investors, who would be watching the competition and forming opinions about the contestants. He had positioned himself not just as a competitor, but as a thought leader and connector in the Kenyan business community. Amani had introduced me to 3 potential investors for my startup before he even got eliminated. Revealed a local entrepreneur who had met Amani at a networking event during the competition's filming. He wasn't just thinking about winning the show, he was thinking about building lasting value for everyone in his network. As the elimination vote approached, Amani had all his pieces in position. He had built a network of external allies, gathered comprehensive intelligence on his remaining competitors, established himself as indispensable while simultaneously making his elimination seem necessary, and created systems that would continue working in his favor even after he left. The other contestants thought they were making a smart, strategic move by eliminating their biggest threat. What they didn't realize was that they were actually executing the most crucial phase of Amani's master plan. The beautiful thing about Amani's strategy, observed Peter Mbugua, the show's host, in a later interview, was that it was simultaneously completely transparent and completely invisible. Everything he did was right there for everyone to see, but the true purpose and interconnectedness of his actions only became clear in retrospect. As Amani's car pulled away from the resort that night, the remaining contestants celebrated what they believed was their smartest strategic move of the entire competition. They had no idea that they had just activated the most sophisticated revenge plot in reality television history. The first sign that something was amiss came just 24 hours after Amani's elimination. The remaining 4 contestants, David, Grace, James, and Sarah, woke up to discover that their access to several crucial resources had been mysteriously revoked. "I don't understand," Sarah said, staring at her laptop screen in confusion. "The business database that Amani set up for us is showing an access denied message, and all those contact numbers he shared, half of them are going straight to voicemail, with messages saying the contacts are no longer available for this project." David, who had orchestrated Amani's elimination, tried to maintain his confidence. "It's probably just a technical glitch. We don't need Amani's resources anyway. We're better off developing our own connections and strategies." But as the day progressed, it became clear that this was no technical glitch. The sophisticated project management system that Amani had created for the team, the one that tracked all their deadlines, resources, and strategic plans, had been completely locked down. The shared documents containing weeks of collaborative work were inaccessible. Even the group chat that had become central to their communication had been mysteriously deleted. "It's like Amani took half of our operational infrastructure with him when he left," Grace admitted to the cameras, her usual composure beginning to crack. "I didn't realize how dependent we had become on the systems he had set up." But the real revelation came during that evening's challenge briefing. Peter Mbugua announced that the next task would be a comprehensive business pitch to a panel of Kenya's most influential investors and business leaders. The contestants would have 48 hours to prepare presentations that could determine not just who won the challenge, but who would receive actual investment offers for their real-world business ventures. "This is your opportunity to showcase everything you've learned during this competition," Peter explained. "The panel includes some of the most successful entrepreneurs in East Africa. Impress them, and you could walk away with more than just the competition prize." As the cameras revealed the panel of judges, the remaining contestants felt their confidence evaporate. Sitting at the judges' table were 5 of the most prominent business leaders in Kenya, and 3 of them were people that Amani had personally introduced to various contestants throughout the competition. "Wait," James whispered to Sarah. "Isn't that Margaret Wanjiru, the woman Amani connected you with for your marketing project? And that's definitely Samuel Kiprotich, the investor Amani said could help with my tech startup." Sarah's face went pale as the realization hit her. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no." The true scope of Amani's strategy began to unfold as the contestants attempted to prepare their presentations. Every business leader they tried to contact for advice or endorsement seemed to have the same response. They were already committed to supporting another candidate. "I reached out to Dr. Wanjiku Mbugua, the woman who had agreed to mentor me," Grace explained in a confessional, her voice tight with stress. "Her assistant told me that she was no longer available to work with contestants from the show. When I pressed for details, I was told that she had already committed to supporting a more suitable candidate for her investment portfolio." The pattern was consistent across all their networks. Business leaders who had previously been enthusiastic about working with the contestants were suddenly unavailable, already committed, or simply not responding to calls and emails. It was James who first voiced what they were all beginning to suspect. Guys, I think we've been played. I think Amani saw this elimination coming and prepared for it. The confirmation came in the most dramatic way possible. As the contestants struggled with their presentations on the second day, they received an unexpected visitor. Amani Kamau walked into their workspace, but he wasn't there as a former contestant making a social call. He was there as a business consultant, accompanied by 2 of the eliminated contestants and 3 prominent Kenyan entrepreneurs. "Hello everyone," Amani said with a calm smile that sent chills down their spines. "I hope you don't mind the interruption. I wanted to introduce you to my new business partners." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Amani hadn't just been eliminated from the competition. He had used his elimination as a launching pad for something much bigger. "You see," Amani continued, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. "While you've all been focused on winning a reality show, I've been building a real business network. The connections I made during this competition, the relationships I developed with our fellow contestants, the trust I built with Kenya's business community. None of that disappeared when you voted me off." He gestured to the people who had accompanied him. "Mercy, John, and Patricia here have all joined me in launching a new consulting firm that specializes in strategic business development for emerging entrepreneurs. We've already secured our first 3 major clients, and we have a waiting list of businesses that want to work with us." David's face had gone from confident to confused to absolutely livid. "You can't be serious. You're telling us that getting voted off was part of your plan?" Amani's smile widened. "David, you've always been so focused on the obvious game that you missed the real one. Yes, I anticipated that you would eventually see me as a threat and try to eliminate me. Your personality type is predictable. You can't stand being outshone, and you always choose short-term tactical victories over long-term strategic thinking." He pulled out a tablet and showed them a detailed timeline. "I knew that by week 6, the pressure would make you paranoid enough to make your move. I knew that Grace would support you because she's risk-averse and would see eliminating me as the safe play. I knew that James and Sarah could be convinced because they're followers who trust authority figures, and you had positioned yourself as the alpha of the group." The timeline was incredibly detailed, showing not just when Amani had predicted his elimination, but how he had systematically prepared for it. Every conversation, every favor, every piece of advice he had given had been designed to serve his larger strategy. "But here's what you didn't understand," Amani continued, his voice taking on an almost professorial tone. "This competition was never about winning a reality show. It was about demonstrating strategic thinking, building real relationships, and creating lasting value. The $500,000 prize is nice, but the business network I've built is worth millions." Grace found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "So everything you did for us, all the help you gave us, was just manipulation?" Amani's expression softened slightly. "No, Grace, everything I did for you was genuine. The help was real, the advice was sound, the connections were valuable. The manipulation was in making you believe that eliminating me would solve your problems, rather than create new ones." He turned to address all of them. "I genuinely wanted all of you to succeed. I still do. But I also knew that some of you would choose fear over trust, competition over collaboration. I prepared for that possibility." Sarah, who had been silent throughout this revelation, finally spoke up. "What happens now? What happens to us?" Amani's response was perhaps the most chilling part of his entire revelation. "Now you get exactly what you voted for. You get to compete without me, without my resources, without my network, without my support. You get to prove that you can succeed on your own merit, which is what David convinced you that you wanted." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The difference is that while you're trying to win a game show, I'm building an empire. While you're competing against each other for a single prize, I'm creating opportunities for everyone who chose to work with me rather than against me." The final twist came when Peter Mbugua entered the room, having witnessed the entire exchange. "Amani," he said with obvious admiration, "I have to ask, Was this entire scenario something you planned from the beginning? Amani nodded. Peter, I've been studying strategic business development for over a decade. I knew that the real value of this competition wouldn't come from winning it, but from how effectively I could leverage the platform to build something lasting. Getting eliminated was never a failure. It was a graduation. As Amani and his new business partners prepared to leave, he turned back to the remaining contestants one final time. I want you all to know that my door is always open. If you decide that you'd rather build something together than tear each other down, you know how to reach me. But if you choose to continue playing the game the way David has taught you, then you'll get exactly the results that approach deserves. The room fell silent as Amani left, leaving the 4 remaining contestants to grapple with the reality that they had been outmaneuvered so completely that they hadn't even realized they were playing the wrong game until it was too late. David, his face red with anger and embarrassment, finally exploded. This is insane. He can't just waltz back here and act like he's won something. He got voted off. He lost. But even as he said the words, David knew they rang hollow. Looking around the room at his remaining allies, seeing the doubt and regret in their eyes, he was beginning to understand that Amani Kamau had just demonstrated the difference between winning a battle and winning a war. The aftermath of Amani's revelation was swift and devastating for the remaining contestants. What had started as a confident alliance celebrating their strategic victory quickly devolved into paranoia, finger-pointing, and the complete collapse of any remaining trust between them. The first casualty was the relationship between David and Grace. Within hours of Amani's visit, Grace was questioning every decision she had made since the beginning of the competition. I keep thinking about all the opportunities Amani offered me that I turned down because David convinced me they were manipulation tactics, Grace confided to the cameras, her usual composure completely shattered. There was that introduction to the venture capital firm in Nairobi that I declined because David said it would make me too dependent on Amani's network. That same firm just announced a $50 million fund specifically for supporting women entrepreneurs in East Africa. The psychological impact was even more severe than the practical consequences. Grace had built her entire identity around being the smartest person in the room, the one who could see through manipulation and make purely rational decisions. Discovering that she had been outmaneuvered so completely was devastating to her sense of self. I prided myself on being able to read people, she said, tears streaming down her face during a particularly emotional confessional. I thought I was protecting myself and the group from Amani's manipulation. But I was the one being manipulated, by David, by my own fears, by my inability to see past the obvious game to the real strategy being played. David, meanwhile, was experiencing his own crisis, but his response was characteristically aggressive rather than introspective. He began lashing out at everyone around him, blaming his fellow contestants for not seeing through what he now claimed was an obvious setup. "You're all acting like Amani is some kind of genius," David raged during a group meeting that quickly devolved into shouting. "He's a con artist. He manipulated all of us, and now he's trying to make us feel bad about making the smart strategic move to eliminate him." But David's anger couldn't hide the fact that his own position had become untenable. The business contacts he had been cultivating throughout the competition were suddenly unresponsive. The investors who had shown interest in his marketing firm were now exploring other opportunities. Even his own team members were beginning to question his judgment and leadership. James, who had always been the most conflict-averse member of the group, was perhaps suffering the most. His entire strategy had been based on aligning himself with whoever seemed to be winning at any given moment. Now he was faced with the realization that he had backed the wrong horse and burned bridges with the person who had actually been playing the winning game. "I feel like such an idiot," James admitted in a private moment with the cameras. Amani offered to introduce me to the head of innovation at Safaricom, one of the biggest telecom companies in Africa. I turned it down because David convinced me it was a trap, that Amani was trying to make me dependent on him. That introduction could have changed my entire career trajectory. The practical consequences of their decision were becoming more apparent by the hour. The business challenge that was supposed to showcase their abilities to potential investors was turning into a disaster. Without access to Amani's resources and network, they were struggling to put together even basic presentations. Sarah, who had perhaps been closest to Amani before his elimination, was experiencing the deepest regret. She had built her entire competition strategy around the mentorship and support Amani had provided, and without it, she felt completely lost. "I don't even know who I am as a businesswoman without Amani's guidance," she confessed. "He helped me develop my confidence, my strategic thinking, my presentation skills. I thought I was learning to be independent, but I realize now that I was just learning to be dependent on him in a more sophisticated way." But the most devastating consequence was yet to come. As the contestants struggled through their presentations to the panel of investors, it became clear that Amani's influence extended far beyond what they had imagined. The first investor to speak was Margaret Wanjiru, the successful entrepreneur who had been one of Amani's key connections. Her feedback was polite but devastating. "I have to say, I'm disappointed in what I'm seeing here today," she told the contestants. "Based on the conversations I had with Amani Kamau about this group, I was expecting to see innovative thinking, collaborative leadership, and strategic vision. Instead, I'm seeing presentations that lack depth, strategies that are short-sighted, and a group dynamic that seems to be based more on fear and competition than on mutual support and shared success." The second investor was even more direct. "I've been following this competition closely, and I have to ask, what happened to the collaborative approach that made your early challenges so successful? The team that Amani described to me was one that leveraged each other's strengths and built on collective intelligence. What I'm seeing today looks like four individuals who are more interested in undermining each other than in creating value." The final blow came from Samuel Kipradech, the tech investor who had been particularly interested in James's startup. "James, I was very excited about your project based on the initial presentation that Amani shared with me. But what you've shown me today lacks the strategic depth and market understanding that made your earlier work so promising. It's as if you've lost the thread of your own vision." As the presentations concluded and the investors deliberated, the contestants sat in stunned silence. They were beginning to understand that Amani hadn't just taken his resources with him when he left. He had taken their credibility, their reputation, and their future opportunities. The final twist came when Peter Mbugua announced the results of the investor panel. "I have to tell you that this is unprecedented in the history of our show," he said, his expression grave. "For the first time ever, our panel of investors has decided not to make any investment offers to the remaining contestants." The silence in the room was deafening. "However," Peter continued, "they have asked me to extend an invitation to Amani Kamau and his new business partners to present their consulting firm to the panel next week. It seems that the real business opportunity emerging from this competition is happening outside the official game." David's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, disbelief, and finally, a kind of hollow resignation. "So, we eliminated the only person who could have helped us succeed, and now he's getting the opportunities that should have been ours." Peter's response was perhaps the most educational moment of the entire competition. "David, I think you're still missing the fundamental lesson here. Amani didn't take opportunities away from you. He created opportunities for everyone who was willing to work with him, rather than against him. The investors aren't choosing him over you because of some conspiracy. They're choosing him because he demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking, relationship building, and collaborative leadership that they want to support." As the cameras captured the contestants' reactions, the full scope of Amani's victory became clear. He hadn't just survived his elimination, he had used it as a launching pad to achieve something far greater than winning a reality show. Grace, who had been silent throughout the investor feedback, finally spoke up. "Can I ask you something, Peter? Did Amani know this would happen? Did he plan for us to fail this badly?" Peter considered the question carefully. "I think Amani planned for multiple scenarios. He prepared for the possibility that you would choose competition over collaboration, fear over trust, but he also left the door open for you to make different choices. The failure you're experiencing isn't because Amani sabotaged you, it's because you sabotaged yourselves. The episode ended with the four remaining contestants sitting alone in their workspace, surrounded by the remnants of failed presentations and broken alliances. They had gotten exactly what they voted for, a competition without Amani Kamau. The problem was that they were beginning to realize that Amani had never been their competition. He had been their greatest asset, and they had thrown it away out of fear and short-sighted thinking. As the cameras faded to black, viewers were left with a powerful lesson about the difference between tactical victories and strategic success, between eliminating threats and eliminating opportunities, between winning games and building legacies. 6 months after the competition ended, the true impact of Amani Kamau's Masterplan had become even more apparent. His consulting firm, built on the foundation of relationships formed during and after the show, had grown into one of Nairobi's most sought-after strategic development companies. What Amani demonstrated reflected Dr. Margaret Wanjiru, one of the investors who had declined to fund the remaining contestants, was the difference between playing to win and playing to build. Most people in competitive situations focus on defeating their opponents. Amani focused on creating value for everyone around him, which ultimately made him undefeatable. The consulting firm that Amani had launched with his fellow eliminated contestants had secured contracts with 3 major Kenyan corporations and was expanding into Uganda and Tanzania. More importantly, they had created a new model for business development that prioritized collaboration over competition, long-term relationship building over short-term victories. The beautiful irony, observed Peter Mbugua in a follow-up interview, is that Amani achieved everything the competition was supposed to offer: investment, mentorship, business partnerships, and industry recognition. But he did it by being eliminated rather than by winning. The remaining contestants from the show had experienced varying degrees of recovery from their strategic miscalculation. Sarah Wanjiku had eventually reached out to Amani and was now working as a project manager for his consulting firm, having learned valuable lessons about the difference between dependence and collaboration. I realized that my fear of being dependent on Amani was actually preventing me from learning how to be interdependent with him, Sarah explained. There's a huge difference between relying on someone because you're weak and partnering with someone because together you're stronger. James Kiprotich had also eventually swallowed his pride and approached Amani for advice on his tech startup. While he wasn't offered a position with the consulting firm, Amani had connected him with investors who were specifically interested in supporting entrepreneurs who had learned from their mistakes. Amani taught me that strategic thinking isn't just about planning your own moves, James reflected. It's about understanding the entire ecosystem you're operating in and finding ways to create value for everyone in that ecosystem. Grace Njeri had perhaps learned the most painful but valuable lesson. Her experience had forced her to confront her own arrogance and the ways that her fear of being outmaneuvered had actually made her more vulnerable to manipulation. I thought I was protecting myself by being suspicious of Amani's motives, Grace admitted, but my suspicion made me blind to David's actual manipulation. I was so focused on the threat I imagined that I missed the real threat right in front of me. Grace had eventually started her own financial consulting practice, but she had adopted many of Amani's collaborative principles. Her business was smaller than what she might have achieved with Amani's support, but it was built on a foundation of genuine relationships rather than competitive positioning. David Mwangi's story was perhaps the most cautionary. Unable to accept that his approach had been fundamentally flawed, he had continued to operate with the same aggressive, zero-sum mentality that had led to Amani's elimination. His marketing firm had struggled to find clients, partly because word had spread through Nairobi's business community about his behavior during the competition. David represents a very common type in business, Amani observed when asked about his former competitor. He's someone who sees every interaction as a battle to be won, rather than a relationship to be built. That approach can work in the short term, but it's ultimately self-defeating because it destroys the trust and collaboration that real success requires. The broader lessons from Amani's master plan had implications far beyond reality television or business competition. His strategy demonstrated principles that could be applied to any situation where people are competing for limited resources or recognition. The first lesson was about the power of reframing competition. While everyone else was focused on winning a game show, Amani was focused on building a business network. By changing the definition of success, he was able to achieve victory even in apparent defeat. Most people accept the terms of competition as they're presented, explained Dr. Wanjiku Mbugua, a business strategy professor at the University of Nairobi who had studied Amani's approach. Amani redefined what winning meant, which allowed him to play a completely different game than everyone else. The second lesson was about the strategic value of being underestimated. By allowing his competitors to see him as a threat that needed to be eliminated, Amani had actually positioned himself to benefit from their fear-based decision-making. Amani understood that sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponents think they're winning, observed Samuel Kiprotich, the tech investor. By making his elimination seem like their victory, he got them to execute the very strategy that would ultimately benefit him most. The third lesson was about the importance of building systems that worked independently of your presence. Amani's network, relationships, and reputation continued to serve him even after he was no longer physically present in the competition. True strategic thinking involves creating value that persists beyond your direct involvement, noted Margaret Wanjiru. Amani didn't just build relationships, he built a reputation for creating value for others, which meant that people continued to want to work with him, even when he wasn't actively competing. Perhaps the most important lesson was about the difference between tactical intelligence and strategic wisdom. David and his allies had been tactically smart in eliminating their biggest threat, but they had been strategically foolish in destroying their greatest asset. Intelligence is about solving the problem in front of you, Amani explained in a keynote speech he gave at a Nairobi business conference 6 months after the show. Wisdom is about understanding which problems are worth solving and which problems are actually opportunities in disguise. The story of Amani's master plan had become a case study in business schools across East Africa, used to teach students about strategic thinking, relationship building, and the long-term consequences of short-term decisions. What makes Amani's strategy so brilliant, explained Dr. Mbugua, is that it was simultaneously completely ethical and completely devastating to his opponents. He didn't lie, cheat, or manipulate in any traditional sense. He simply understood the game better than anyone else and played it at a level that his competitors couldn't even perceive. As for Amani himself, he had become something of a legend in Kenya's business community, not just for his strategic brilliance, but for his commitment to collaborative success. His consulting firm had a waiting list of clients, and he was regularly invited to speak at conferences and universities about strategic thinking and ethical leadership. The most satisfying part of this whole experience, Amani reflected, wasn't proving that I could outmaneuver my competitors. It was demonstrating that you can achieve extraordinary success by helping others succeed, by building rather than destroying, by creating value rather than just capturing it. The final twist in Amani's story came a year after the competition ended. The show's producers, recognizing the unprecedented interest in his strategic approach, offered him his spin-off series focused on teaching strategic thinking and collaborative leadership to emerging entrepreneurs. "They want me to host a show about turning competition into collaboration." Amani laughed when asked about the offer. "I think there's something beautifully ironic about that." Whether or not he accepts the hosting opportunity, Amani Kamau's master plan has already achieved something far more valuable than any reality show prize. It has demonstrated that in a world obsessed with winning and losing, the smartest strategy might be to change the game entirely. His story serves as a powerful reminder that true strategic thinking isn't about defeating your opponents. It's about creating conditions where everyone can succeed, including yourself. And sometimes, The most brilliant victory is the one that looks like a defeat to everyone else. This incredible story of strategic genius and long-term thinking shows us that sometimes the most powerful move is the one that appears to be a loss. Amani Kamau didn't just survive being voted off. He used it as the foundation for building something far greater than any reality show prize could offer. What do you think about Amani's approach? Was his strategy brilliant or manipulative? Could you have seen through his plan if you were one of the other contestants? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these incredible stories of human psychology and strategic thinking. If this story of masterful planning and strategic revenge amazed you, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates the art of long-term thinking. And don't forget to subscribe to Narrated by Abi and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of incredible human ingenuity, strategic brilliance, and the fascinating ways people navigate competition and conflict. What other stories of strategic thinking or brilliant revenge plots would you like to hear? Let us know in the comments. And remember, sometimes the most powerful victory is the one that looks like a defeat to everyone else. Until next time, this is Narrated by Abi, reminding you that in the game of life, the smartest players aren't always the ones who appear to be winning.